Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turns multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. Welcome back, warriors. You are going to so dig today's episode. People ask me all the time why I started the Suburban Warrior brand and the podcast. And I say it's because I want to empower women to live their life with passion, purpose, and personal power. But secretly and selfishly, it's because I get to talk to badass warriors like my guest today. I am so energized and so excited for this conversation. So let me introduce to you Kandia Johnson. And here's a little bit about Kandia before we get into all the fun conversation we have. So after 10 years of developing global training and communication campaigns for companies such as Deloitte Consulting and the U.S. Navy, Kandia transformed from unfulfilled to unapologetic. Man, do I love that. About designing a life and a career with purpose. Finding her sweet spot for amplifying the voices of women leaders of color, she launched Candid Conversations and She Deserves More, a leadership training, coaching, and mentoring program for business owners, managers, and executives. Specializing in confidence, mindful communication, and storytelling, she's helped her clients pitch and position themselves for executive roles, launch global campaigns, and land speaking engagements and media coverage. She also started the Candid Conversations podcast to inspire mid-career women to speak up and show up anyway, despite dealing with self-doubt, fear, and anxiety. Kandia has interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs and changemakers and published articles about business and life for publications such as Black Enterprise Magazine, Diversity Women, AARP Sisters, and more. Beyond being featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and more, Kandia has delivered presentations on stages throughout the United States and Africa. To date, influential brands such as the South by Southwest Conference, Harvard University Business School, the James Beard Foundation, and African Women in Technology have invited her to speak at their events. Kandia graduated from Delaware State University with a BA in Public Relations and earned a master's in education from Old Dominion University. Woo! Man, oh man, that is one badass bio. Welcome to the podcast, Kandia.
Thank you. I am super hyped to be here.
Oh, I'm super hyped to have you because I just read your bio. I look at your website. I listen to your podcast, Candid Conversations, and I get so energized because you just have such an authenticity and energy about you that is truly inspiring. And I'm so excited to have you here to talk to my listeners today.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Can you tell me, let's hear about your story because I know, like you said, you went from unfulfilled to unapologetic, right. Unfulfilled to unapologetic. Love that because, man, does that just paint a picture for us? So tell us about that. How did that happen?
So I always felt like I did everything my parents and society told me to do to be successful. I went to school, I went to college, I got an advanced degree, I got the good job with the 6-figure salary and the good benefits and all those sorts of things. I bought a house, I traveled around the world, and I still felt unfulfilled. I didn't get the husband yet, but we're going to speak him into existence. Okay?
That's right. Manifest that.
We're going to manifest him.
That's right.
So I always felt like I did everything that I was supposed to do. But at the end of the day, I still felt incredibly unfulfilled. And so at the time, I was working in consulting Deloitte Consulting, in fact. And I was traveling quite a bit. So Monday through Thursday, or either Sunday through Friday, was typically my schedule. And I was flying in and out to client sites. And I was unhappy. There was something missing. On top of the fact that I felt like I just didn't fit into that corporate rat race and struggle. Honestly, I didn't see anyone who looked like me getting ahead. And so that, coupled with the fact that I felt like I was supposed to be doing something more, I really struggled with. So I remember, now listen, I had to struggle for years. I would say 3 to 4 years before I finally decided to take the leap into really the unknown. But I went on a safari trip. It was a mother-daughter safari trip to South Africa. And I remember we were all sitting by the pool. We were at this hotel that didn't have electricity after a certain time and no TVs and anything. And so it was really a reflective space for you to just get honest about everything that was happening, right? And so I said, you know what? I think when I get back to the United States, this is it. I'm going to give my notice. And that was the end of 2012. And so I took the leap. I thought that I would consult and deal with contractors and things of that sort for a little while. And it just kind of expanded into opportunities such as writing and interviewing other entrepreneurs. And then I decided to, so long story short, I decided to form my own company after that.
So I want to highlight one of the things that you said, because you said, you felt that way for like 3 or 4 years. And I had gone through a similar situation, corporate world, into being an entrepreneur. And people are like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? When I talk to people, and they think it was like one day I just decided to up and leave. And same, like I was miserable for years. And it was a process that I had to go through in order to really get to the point where I was ready to make that change. And so I think that's important for people to realize, like, it's not something that can happen overnight. I mean, I guess it's possible, but it is a process, and you have to, it takes getting to the right time. And it's, yes, you're living in that fear and you're miserable, but you have to kind of work your way out of it. And it doesn't happen overnight. And it does take a work and thought process. And like you said, maybe getting into that reflective space so that you can really decide that it's time to make a change. So
for me too, I would say I got sick and tired of looking at myself that way.
Yeah.
Sick and tired of looking at myself in the mirror, crying before I would go into the office every day.
So what was it about? I know you said you owning your story, right? Part of your story, and I think a lot of people's, mine as well, your parents kind of build that story for you, or they tell you that story, and like, this is what a good life is. Good life is going to college and getting a great job and having a house and paying your mortgage and making sure all your credit card bills are paid off. And, that's the quote unquote happy life. Like you said, having a pension. So how do you go from that story to switching it up and feeling confident in that?
So one of the things that I've learned, and rather recently, I've begun to phrase it this way, is that confidence comes from community. And so once I took the leap, the first thing I realized is that I spent so much time trying to build this network within the company, right, to get ahead, that I really did a piss poor job at building relationships outside of my company. So once I took the leap, I got on Twitter and I realized I don't have any online presence. And so I came across a request from a tweet from an editor. They were looking for writers to, write articles about entrepreneurship and leaders and things of that sort. And so I pitched the series to them. And I figured, okay, I'll write 3 or 4 articles so that I could get some followers on Twitter.
Yeah.
And, but at the same time, I was thinking, I need to see how people are making this entrepreneurship thing work. So what better way than to interview people, successful people who are doing it?
Absolutely.
And so it was supposed to be a 3 to 4 part series. I wound up probably producing at least 1,000 articles, if not more, for the publication over the years. But just interviewing people and seeing that other people were able to change direction mid-career, that they were able to unlearn, because I think that that's important. We always talk about learning, but sometimes you have to unlearn to level up to get to that next space in life. And so surrounding myself and building relationships with people who had done those things that I wanted to do was really helpful for me. So even what you're doing right now for someone, you are changing lives, right? You are helping someone rewrite their story. You're helping them to unlearn by sharing, my story and the many other amazing women that's been on your podcast.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely comes down to finding your tribe, finding your community, people who are, your goals may not be the same, but the mission is the same, to change direction and to just do something entirely new.
Oh man, do I love that. Confidence comes from community. It is so true. It is so true. Finding those people that lift us up, that inspire us, that mentor us, whether they know it or not, even if they mentor us from afar online, it's so important to find those people and let them inspire you and let them mentor you, even if they're not physically, right there with you all the time. Another thing that I loved reading on your website was when you said, my ladder of success was placed in the wrong building. I read that and, that was just like a slap across the face. Because again, so I think so many people have success and they are able to find success, but yet they're miserable or they're sick and they're just not passionate about what they're doing. And I think it takes, a lot of introspective time and thought process to really say that statement out loud, that my ladder of success is just not where I think it should be. I'm not feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose. It's almost like the purpose that is handed to you a little, that you follow in life. And so, you realize that obviously your ladder was in the wrong building and you gave yourself permission to make this change. And I know you talk a lot about permission slips. So what was that like for you to, I'm sure it was a little scary, but how did you deal with that fear? How did you give yourself permission to make this change in your life?
Well, part of it, so it was a couple of things. There's no quick fix, right? And so one thing is you really have to open yourself up to curiosity. And you have to open yourself up to, I call it owning your BS, which is your belief system. It's the lies and excuses you tell yourself for why something can't happen. It's the principles that you were raised to believe and live by as a child. So it's essentially giving yourself permission to believe differently. It's also understanding that you are not your thoughts. Because for a lot of us, when we get to this place, and we are unfulfilled and unhappy, we beat ourselves up because now we want to make this change and we start to regret some decisions that we've made in the past. And so forming that new belief system comes with, looking at things or giving yourself permission to believe that it's okay to live multiple lives in one lifetime. I'm doing this right now, but guess what? Next year it may change and that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it not only is it okay, it's amazing, right? Because you realize that you're not just one facet of yourself. There's so many different areas to build upon in your life. And it gives you the permission to sort of figure that out as you go. I mean, I've had like 4 different careers. I'm 46 years old. I'm proud of that because it's given me the opportunity to grow in so many different areas. And, when I'm done with this one, I'll move on to the next and I'm trying to follow my passions. While it's not easy, it's just, I'm cognizant of. When I start to lose passion, lose energy for something, move on to the next.
Right.
Okay. So I love how you also talk about like owning your story, right? Because we all have a story. And I think that's such a huge part of finding your passion, right? Is owning, like you say, the good, the bad, and the ugly of your story. So what is your advice to someone who might feel maybe stuck in their story or might just be working on, or their story is coming from the negative self-talk and the self-doubt and the fear? How should they go about owning their story?
So, well, first you have to be incredibly honest with yourself in terms of where you are. It's okay to say, I'm not sure where I want to be right now. It's okay to say that, right? And then the second thing I would say is just to get curious about those things that you are interested in. So when I look back at myself, 5 or 6 years ago, when I stumbled across the tweet from the editor, I had no idea that I was going to fall in love with interviewing entrepreneurs and executives and change makers around the world. I had no idea. I just wanted more followers, right? At that time, I was just like, give me the followers because I need to make some money.
Right.
And so I just followed that interest. And so I would say that it was a series of moments where I just opened myself up to following that thing that I was curious about. And that led me to this place where I absolutely love what I do. I don't love it every day. Okay. It's ups and downs, but at the end of the day, I love what I do. So I would say, get honest with yourself about, where you are in your life, and be vocal too. For me, when I look back at that time in Africa, I was with my mom and my mom's best friend and my sister. And so I had this conversation with myself because I was nervous about telling them that I was going to leave my job. I was done. Yeah. Right. And that, looking back, that was a part of owning the good, bad, and ugly of my story, telling them that, yes, you may have taught me well in terms of being responsible and developing a work ethic, but this life doesn't work for me. Yeah. It just doesn't work for me. And I need to take some time to figure that out. So I would say self-awareness, opening yourself up to curiosity, following your interests, even if you say 3 months down the line. I took an interior design class, okay, at one point. Even if you
how'd that work out?
It did. Listen, okay, I'll stick with HGTV. That's my thing. That's it. I love it. But just opening yourself up to exploring those things that interest you and being very open and honest about, this is not working for me, but I'm going to check this thing out and see what happens from here.
So I'm curious because I'm sure during that time in Africa, when you were, sitting in your reflective space with no electricity, and decided that you were going to, kind of come clean with your thoughts and how you felt, and to your mom or your sister, whoever it was at first, I'm sure you had this whole scenario, conjured up in your mind about how that was going to go and how awful it was going to be. How did that end up going?
So it got awful a few times. Real talk, it got awful.
Yeah, it got bad.
Yeah, it definitely got bad a few times because I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I really didn't, but It was worth it. I'm here to tell you right now that it was definitely worth it. And it allowed me to be here, right, with you, helping someone else rewrite their story. And I absolutely love it. I don't regret anything about the space that I'm in right now. And when I look at the opportunities that's come from it, from, speaking in Africa, having clients in the US and Africa and all these sorts of things, when I look at these sorts of opportunities, it was all worth it for me. It continues to be worth it for me. And so I feel like one of the things that we have to do as women is give ourselves permission to change direction, give yourself permission to sit in discomfort. So I always tell people this: on the other side of your feelings of self-doubt, uncertainty, anxiety, shame, on the other side of those emotions, that's where your success lies. Give yourself permission to sit in those feelings and figure it out. You see, when we avoid those feelings, we continue to allow things that in our lives that simply do not fulfill us. We stay in places, even relationships, way too long because we are trying to avoid some of those feelings. But on the other side of those feelings, if you allow yourself to sit in those feelings, that's where your success lies.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I think it is very difficult, especially when you're in the moment, to accept some of those emotions and accept those feelings, and have to, I think our natural inclination is to avoid them, right? To stay in comfort, not feel the discomfort. But when you can just get through it and allow yourself to feel it and get to the other side, it's amazing the transformation that occurs. Right. So can you think of a time in either your life when you were going through this, or maybe even a client, because I know you work with so many clients and women to help them, empower themselves, and, in women in leadership, and, can you think of an example or a story of where you felt, this is it, this isn't going to work, and then you pushed through, or maybe one of your clients?
So I'll use me for an example. I would say maybe 2 years after I left corporate America, I was relying totally on, contractors, like I said earlier. And so the work dried up.
Mm-hmm.
It completely dried up. I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent. I know it's such like a cliche story to everyone, but seriously, it got just that bad.
Yeah.
And I remember I called a friend at the time, Liz, and I was crying like, girl, I don't know how I'm going to pay this rent. The work is dried up. She said, Kandia, you have to cold call people. You have to get out of your way and call. And I was like, cold call people, what's that?
Yeah.
I was used to the work coming to me.
Right.
But I did just that. And I picked up the phone and I started calling and pitching companies, women's business centers. That was probably one of my first gigs that I started to get in terms of the speaking realm. And then I started to see opportunity there. And I found love in doing that. And I continue to do that right now. I have quite a few repeated corporate clients. And so I would say at that point, I was literally ready to give up. Like, okay, let me freshen up the resume. And because can't be a girl, this is not going to work. You got rent to pay. And so it took me, I want to say maybe it was about a month or two later, I got a call from a university who had a corporate training and education department. And they said, listen, we have a few corporate clients. We would love to partner. And that I started that relationship, and that created a lot of opportunity for me. And then it also provided me with a strong business model for my business. But I would also say this to someone. A lot of the times we look outside of ourselves for answers, and the answer is truly within. It is truly within. It was also getting over my fear of rejection from cold calling people. It really wasn't the process of doing it. It was just like, what if they say no? Well, Kandia, they're going to say no. What if they ignore me? Kandia, they're going to ignore you.
Yeah.
So a huge part of your success lies in your ability to have better conversations with yourself, to learn how to challenge and change that internal story that you're telling yourself about being rejected or about facing your fears and things of that sort. And so I laugh all the time. I talk to myself all day. Like sometimes I'm like, Kandia, girl, we're not doing this today. Okay. Today, you're going to get your mind right. Okay. You're going to put your little aromatherapy things together to get your energy flowing.
I love it.
And you're going to get out of this space.
Yeah. And we're laughing, but that's what you have to do. I mean, that really, truly helps. And what's so funny is that was sort of my next question, because I know that similar to me, your mission is to empower women to sort of break through their fear and get to the other side. And I love that. I love that we have very similar missions and goals of what we're doing and our purpose in life. So my question was going to be, are there some tips that you could give listeners to, like, how do you do that? Because it's obviously very easy to say, yes, break through your fear, break through self-doubt. I mean, personally, much like you, I have conversations with myself all day long. And, but this has been years and years. I mean, 10 years that I've been a coach, that I've trained my brain to, like, as soon as that it trickles into self-doubt, I have to flip the switch and I have to have a conversation with myself. And, sometimes those conversations are nice and sometimes they're not. Right. I'm like, what are you, an asshole? Come on. Get
right.
Out. So, but what would you recommend? Like, what are some strategies that you talk to your clients about? Just something that they can work on to.
So I'm going to share a few things. Okay. To your point, training your mind is a daily process.
Daily. Yep.
Just like you train for a marathon, you have to train your mind to work through self-doubt and uncertainty and fear. And so for me, it's a daily ritual. Now, sometimes I wake up, definitely may listen to something very inspiring or something just to challenge me. I'm a huge fan of aromatherapy. Sometimes I pray. Sometimes I read. I have these index cards with some personal affirmation cards. I read those affirmation cards. I'm also a huge fan. One of the best investments that I made was getting into therapy. And so I always encourage people, if you can. It may not work the first time or the second time or the third time, but sometimes you cannot see outside of yourself.
Totally.
And a good therapist will help you get through some of that clutter, that junk, that gunk. And sometimes you just need to do a good old brain dump. And that's what a therapist can do. So I recommend therapy. So I go to therapy. I try to go at least once a month, sometimes more if I need to. And then I mentioned this briefly, but I do brain dumps every week, usually on a Sunday. So I write my goals on one side, and then on the other side, I do a brain dump of all my negative chatter that I have going on. And I look at those thoughts and I challenge myself to reframe them, right? And so one of the examples that I often give is the night before I do a workshop, I have really bad anxiety. So I'm always like, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if this happens? And so I always challenge myself and I challenge my clients. 9 times out of 10, when you get present, when I say you get present, that means focusing on only the things that you can control. When you get present, you can change or transform your what ifs into what to do now. So sometimes I think, what if my slides don't display on Zoom? What to do now is I use my index cards to jot down my key points so that if Zoom decides to have a mind of its own that day and not display my slides, then guess what, girl? You're going to pull out these index cards and you're still going to make it happen, okay? So if you think about it, getting present, your what ifs can be transformed into what to do now. So that brain dump at times, sometimes I do it every Sunday to plan for the week. Sometimes I have to do it twice a week. Also, I am a garden mama, so I found a love of gardening. So when the weather permits, sometimes, especially during the spring, I would just go out and tend to my garden because it's a reflective reminder of the fact that, you have to nurture, right, your soil. Things have to be watered. Sometimes it's just a process and figuring out how often you should water one vegetable versus the other vegetable and things of that sort. So that often gives me a sense of peace as well. And so ultimately, I would tell someone that it's just not one thing. You have to find the ingredients that's going to make, bring out your best self. And so for me, it's a multitude of those things that I keep in my toolbox.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to your point, I think it's about finding your own personal toolbox, right? But and gardening, wow, what a great metaphor for just life and taking care of ourselves and self-care, right? Because and not only is it a metaphor, but it's sort of like your meditative space, right? It's when you're in peace and quiet and able to reflect and talk to yourself quite a lot. But what I love that you said that you do the brain dump and you put out all of the negative, thoughts that you have, and then you challenge them, because I think that's such an amazing exercise. And your what ifs into what to do now. It's so funny as you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do that. I always do like worst case scenario. That's like how I function. Like, okay, if I do this, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then once I think about it, and then I like back myself out of that. I'm like, well, okay, well, that's not so bad, because at the end of the day, worst case scenarios usually aren't that bad. We're still here. We're still living. We're still, So the what ifs into what to do now. I love the way you put that, because I think that's a great way to think about almost all scenarios and all of the stories that we spin in our world. Like, okay, well, what if that happens? Well, This is what you do. And instantly.
One of the things that I realized, and I try to encourage my clients to see it this way, your thoughts aren't the problem. It's the fact that you let them run around free in your head without challenging them. That's the problem. It's not a bad thing that you have these negative thoughts of what ifs, or you have these negative thoughts of I'm not good enough, right? That's not who you are. It's simply how your brain works. That's it. And so the mere fact that you allow them to run around in your head unattended, that's the problem. The thought isn't the problem.
Right.
And so your job, again, is to develop a daily practice of challenging and changing those thoughts. And for me, when you get it down on paper, you can control it. When you allow them to sit up in your head, you can't control it.
Absolutely. That is the key, actually writing them down. That's why the brain dump is such a great suggestion.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you have just left us with a lot of amazing advice. I also have gotten into some aromatherapy too. I am horrible at gardening, although I look at people's gardens and I really want to do it, but I got to find um, my meditative practice. I do meditate, but I mean, I go on walks. That's one that I do.
Oh, that's
So
wonderful.
yeah, that's another good suggestion. But I want to thank you so, so much for sharing with us your amazing story and for sharing all of these tips and tricks for, how we can just live our lives with more passion and purpose in our lives. Because, girl, you are doing it and you are doing it every day. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
I would encourage everybody who is checking this podcast out today to also check out Kandia's podcast, Candid Conversations. It's awesome. I love listening to it. It's very authentic and real and fun. You're very fun to listen to. So I would encourage everyone to check out Kandia's podcast. And also her website is kandiajohnson.com. So you can read all about her. And of course, you can follow her on social at Kandia Johnson on Twitter and Instagram. And Facebook, she's Kandia Johnson. So there you go. Very easy to find you.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I loved having you and I loved having this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. So thank you so much for joining us again for another episode of Suburban Warrior. Please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast because Kandia and I would both love to hear your thoughts and what you got out of today's episode. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.